what is it? The conspiracy theories, misogyny, and racism. We got Milo Yiannopoulos, Jordan Peterson, another guy who I don't recognize, Stefan Molyneux again. That's the Tonight Show. That's what's his name? I don't remember what his name is. Jimmy Fallon? Jimmy Fallon. We have some blonde chick who I don't recognize. We have I used to know who this guy was. Not Andrew Clavin. Bill Whittle. Guy. Yeah. Again, two other Republican blondes, whatever.
Bill Whittle made me say the N-word. help me, New York Times.
We got Milton Friedman. We have a video thumbnail, which I recognize is from a Stefan Molyneux video. We have Tommy Loren again. We have Gavin McInnes. We have the Nigerian guy, the black guy who records the Fivers. We got Alex Jones talking to Cenk Uygur. We have again Gavin McInnes, and then Paul Joseph Watson, and of course Stephen Crowder. So these are the far right extremists that he's watching on YouTube. Of any of these people, the only one who I would plausibly describe as far right would be Stefan Molyneux. Everyone else is
and even then, like, if you're not in his cult, you're fine.
Yes.
As long as you're not like defooing and all that, then like you're just listening to him talk in his weird accent.
Oh, geez, here's this quote. There's a spectrum on YouTube between the calm section, which is Walter Cronkite and Carl Sagan, and Crazy Town, where the extreme stuff is. Honestly, folks, you can read this whole article for yourself.
This is in the New York Times, by the way.
This is in the New York Times. Yeah,
I love it. Crazy Town, the old gray lady. Where can we get these intelligent takes on the news? I mean, I'm talking. This is Crazy Town, banana pants kind of stuff, guys.
It shows his YouTube history. Hold on. Here's a 48-hour snapshot of what Kane watched in 2015, and oh, geez, yeah, you can scroll through it. The first one he watched was a Stefan Molyneux video called "The Market Value of Female Sexuality." What pisses me off about the Oregon shooting, End Selfishness Now, some German thing about migrants, and then it's just, oh, geez, the rise of cultural libertarianism, the mainstreaming of pedophilia by Paul Joseph Watson. You know, I think the reason we're offended by this, Dan, is because I also believe in a lot of this stuff. What is a hashtag cuckservative? The truth about ISIS with Syrian Girl.
Can I point out something? Isn't there a redemptive arc in this to New York Times? He ends up a liberal, right?
Yeah, that's usually how these stories end. They all become liberals.
He's talking to the New York Times now, so like...
Yes.
This is the thing where it's like, well, then what's the point of this story? It's like, he was a YouTube radical, but now he's not. So the lesson is that everything's fine? Like, I don't get it. Like, what's the point of this other than they don't like... This is the New York Times writing an article that is effectively the same as them writing an article that just says, some people watch things on YouTube that I don't like.
Yes. And that's really what this is.
That person wrote that down, and the New York Times published it, and then we're supposed to read it and like pensively rub our chins or something and go, wow, we really do live in a society.
Yeah, this really is just to get people to... What this article is essentially a call for YouTube to shut down Molyneux's account.
Yeah. Jeffrey Tucker...
And we do know that YouTube apparently shuts down accounts on request, so New York Times is being pretty rational here.
The libertarian writer, Jeffrey Tucker, who he was famously, upset about the alt-right to the point where some people, me among them, were saying that he was getting hysterical about it. And he wrote his book about how right-wing collectivism is the other threat to liberty and all this and blah, blah, blah. He posted this. And even he said, a pretty silly guy gorges on the alt-right, then realizes that's kind of gross, so he gorges on leftist YouTube. So the New York Times writes this up as a warning against something. It's like, even he was like, I don't see the point of this. And he's someone who has been, I don't want to say very critical of the alt-right, because in many ways we're critical of the alt-right. He's been hysterical about the alt-right. He's been, off the deep end about the return of fascism and revanchism in the United States and all this. So even he recognized that this is total like fart smelling by the New York Times.
Yep.
They're just farting it up and sitting in it and smelling it and going, God damn, that smells good.
Speaking of the New York Times, and speaking of censorship, and this one for our safety, we'll only discuss for about 90 seconds. The New York Times will no longer publish political cartoons, period. The reason that they have stopped doing this, and this is a stated reason, is because the New York Times accidentally printed an anti-Semitic political cartoon. Now, I'm going to describe this cartoon. It was a dog with Netanyahu's face on it, and it was leading a blind man, and the blind man was Donald Trump.
Ooh, tropes.
Oh, sorry, that's not actually, I cannot omit this. This is critical. The Netanyahu, like the dog, the Netanyahu one has a Star of David on him, right? Because that's what the Israeli flag literally is, right? So because of this anti-Semitic cartoon, right, about how Jews were leading a blind American leader, we will no longer be seeing political cartoons in the New York Times. That's it. Moving on.
Yeah, really nothing to say about that.
There's nothing to say. There's just nothing to say about that. All right.
Yeah, let's dabble in some other topics.
Yeah, let's talk about something else now.
If we're gonna dabble, let's dabble. In something.
Speaking of dabbling in tropes, let's talk about. Oh wait, no, it was Ilhan Omar. I know. Speaking of dumb things. Oh no, man. Oh, I got it. Speaking of things I wish I didn't need to talk about, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Boom. How's that?
There you go. That's one.
So AOC is cashing in all of her. Oh God, we're talking about Jews again. AOC is cashing in.
There's
all
the
of
episode title. Oh God, we're talking about Jews again.
So AOC is cashing in all of her political chips because AOC has said that the border detention centers where we keep all the migrants and their kids are concentration camps.
Can we be honest? She's not cashing in all her political chips.
She's investing them. She's putting them all on the table.
Not really.
She's going half in.
Comparisons to Nazi Germany are a dime a dozen in American politics.
Here's the thing. She's not even doing... So we've talked about how the Ilhan Omar strategy is to apologize and keep doing it. AOC is saying these are concentration camps. Yes, realsies. And then people are saying, don't you want to, roll that back, apologize to the Jewish community for, using the word concentration camp without their permission? And AOC said, no, they're concentration camps. Right. Yep. And she's quadrupled down on this. There are a variety of ways to tackle this claim, right? You might say, well, first of all, nobody ever, crossed rivers to get into a concentration camp. You could say, well, it's not by race or by anything. It's by, it's for criminal status. There are a few ways you could talk about these camps and say why they're not exactly concentration camps. Because AOC is not saying they're like the Nazi camps either. She is pointing out that concentration camps includes, what the British had in South Africa, what the United States did to the Japanese. He says all those are fit the strict definition of concentration camps. Just because there are no gas chambers and forced labor does not mean they're not concentration camps.
Yeah, that's the difference between a death camp and a concentration camp. A concentration camp is just a place where you concentrate people in a camp. It's like a detention center. It's just another word for a detention center. It's just that we have emotional... She just said something that's a fact. Other people are being emotional about it. 10 years from now, she did it on purpose. She used those words instead of detention center for the same reason that those things are now called detention centers instead of concentration camps.
Yeah,
because concentration camps got a bad connotation, so they changed the name. And then she wanted to point out that they're still effectively similar, so she used the old name purposely to charge people up. That's called politics. It's called rhetoric. It's what you do. We don't have to like her, but let's be fucking real here.
Yes.
I hate the fake outrage. Oh God.
Well, rather, it's more than just that. Because I wasn't being hyperbolic or particularly facetious when I said, they were asking her if she should check with the Jewish community first. That is, in fact, the angle that people are basically going with. Right? I mean, while conservative outlets are using, they're sort of saying, who fights to get into concentration camp? That's like the snarky answer, even though that should be the serious answer. But the serious answer they're giving is really, that's anti-Semitic. You don't have the Jewish community's permission. It really is along those lines. Is it right to use these words without, thinking about the effect that it might have on Jewish people who hear it? Right. That is the talking point on Fox News. That's a talking point on Hannity. That's a talking point on CNN. That's a talking point on MSNBC.
Yeah, it cuts across. It's the larger narrative
Right. I mean, it would be like, and just to give you an idea of how absurd this is, I mean, this would be like if AOC said that, I don't know, if she said that something, okay, let's say AOC were to say that, the system of Mexican migrant labor that we have in America is a form of slavery. I don't think that would be accurate. I'm sure you wouldn't think that would be accurate. But it would be a little strange if the way that mainstream people were disputing this were not to seriously examine and point out the differences. Well, they're working for a wage is a pretty big deal. They're voluntarily coming, so that's a pretty big deal. There's no kind of they can leave whenever they want, right? Those would be serious answers. But instead they said things like, AOC needs to be more careful about calling this migrant system slavery. It might be offensive to the black community. Here are some black community leaders that we brought around to tell you about why it's hurtful that you would use the S word when so many black people suffer from real slavery. That shouldn't be the main line. The main line should be to point out that, if you get paid, if you got there voluntarily and you can live whenever you want, it's probably not slavery.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. What's upsetting you is not that the phony outrage of how dare you say this, how dare you compare something to the idea that the usual complaint, even 2 weeks ago, would be, the old-fashioned complaint is you don't compare things to, the Holocaust. That's uncomparable. But what you're saying is it's gone to this crazier step that's sort of more removed, where it's not that people are objecting to that. They're saying, oh, you can compare things to the Holocaust. You just have to make sure that some vague Jewish community agrees to it, which is just weird and creepy.
Yes.
And it's kind of, what was the William F. Buckley phrase? Laughing at inordinate power even if one deplores it. This idea that, there's this group of people that they get a veto on the words other people are allowed to say. And the creepier part is I could even understand, I still don't agree with it, but I could understand more if someone said, you're not Jewish, you don't make that comparison. I still think that's wrong and, as they say, problematic for all these other reasons about, that's racist and all this. But it's this further removed step where it's like if I use the N-word and someone didn't say to me, whoa, that's a horrible word, or even, whoa, you're white, you can't say it, but do you have a pass?
Which, to be fair, is almost, nobody explicitly says that, although that is something of an implicit.
It's like, do you have your Holocaust pass? Because if you do, you can use it, and you can compare Donald Trump to the Holocaust, or you could compare anything to the Holocaust. If you don't, you can't. But if you do, then it's fine. Which is, it's the, people talk about the cheapening of these things into being just purely political weapons, but it's such an open way of making it a political weapon. Where it's like, yeah, you can definitely use emaciated people in death camps, for your political purposes, as long as some predetermined political gives you the authority to do that. If not, then you can't. Which is totally nakedly political. It's admitting that, we use people for political purposes, tragedies for political purposes, atrocities for political purposes. You just have to make sure that you're on the political power side, and you can do it.
Yeah.
Which basically she is. It's just a matter of, right now she's not, but if she stays in Congress for a few, then she's just part of the team, and it's no big deal. And she'll get that extension that most people on the team get.
Yeah. And again, I should point out, I'm actually not 100% sure that it is appropriate to call them concentrate.
Yes, I agree with that. I think when in doubt, it's like those things where the libertarian joke about taxes are rape. When in doubt about whether or not the analogy is apt, just don't use the analogy if you're not sure.
Yeah.
If you think it might be, it's one thing to say, I'm not sure if this analogy, but when you're not sure, the more gravity the example that you're using is, the graver it is, the more that the analogy should fit.
Yeah.
It's one thing to compare an apple to an orange. It's another thing to compare it to a death camp. You say, well, maybe I just go with a different example. Like a better example would have been just to flat out say, I'm talking about the Japanese camps. The American camps of Japanese people. And speaking of the AOC Clown World News of the Week, She also had another. She has these flashes. It's very Donald Trump.